Hello. Welcome to Time.Team.Extra. I'm Robin Bush, and every week I'm going to try and bring you something extra to Channel 4's award-winning archaeological show, Time Team, something that we haven't quite managed to squeeze into the programme. I'm joined this week by Dr. Francis Pryor, and he'll hate me for saying this, but Francis is a bit of a living legend in archaeological circles, because about 15 years ago, he discovered some fascinating bits of wood near Peterborough. And this became Flag Fen, one of England's most intriguing archaeological sites. Is that a fair summary, Francis?
Yes, without sounding immodest, yes.
What exactly is Flag Fen?
Well, it's basically a trackway, runs for about 1 kilometre straight across a bog, and in the middle is an enormous platform, and it was all constructed about 1000 BC.
I know we're going to look at it in a little more detail later, but first of all, let's refresh our memories as to what Time Team found in darkest Somerset last Sunday. In the programme, we tried to find a wooden trackway buried somewhere beneath the Somerset levels. For thousands of years, people have been using these trackways as a means of crossing the levels. We had an idea of where it might be from a map drawn by an archaeologist in the 1920s, but of course we still had to find it.
How old would this track have been?
Well, it could be anything back to the Neolithic 4000 BC. The oldest one we know about is the Sweet Track, which is 3807 to 3806 BC.
How can you be so absurdly precise?
It's amazing date. I mean, it's the dendrochronology from the tree rings that gives
This is drilling a little core in
yeah.
and then counting it with computers.
Yeah, seeing the pattern of the rings, and they go on being built in the Bronze Age and right up to the Iron Age.
The nearby nature reserve gives us some idea of what the Somerset levels must have looked like in prehistoric times. This is how the levels look today, and this is the position I paced out as the site of the excavation in 1926. And based on the evidence discovered here, and more wooden piles found here in 1939, the theory is that a prehistoric trackway crossed the marsh in this direction, providing a route between these two areas of higher dry ground.
It wasn't long before we had our first exciting find.
Well, now how do you know that that is not just some old bit of log?
We don't.
No, but I mean the fact is it's diving straight down. It's unlikely to be driftwood or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I mean it don't look as though it's root shaped, does it?
No,
I mean
it
looks like
it's a plank,
it's
doesn't it?
actually a
Plank like
shaped
that.
timber.
Yeah.
For this, we were able to progress with an idea as to what the trackway might have looked like.
Does it really have been that narrow?
Yeah, even narrower perhaps.
Well, some of them were narrow. And the Sweet Track, show you the Sweet Track reconstruction. Look, it's just a plank walkway. So it could have been like that. No doubt why it shouldn't. It's only got to get you across the marsh.
Yeah.
What part of the structure is can't be
Before
sure.
long, we had uncovered a lot more. And the more we dug, the more intriguing it became.
It almost looks like one of those sort of great masses of timber put at the end of a track where you're coming up to the higher land.
Well,
Like a platform, isn't it, they found in the past.
the other thing is we might not have it might not be as simple as it's reported in the 1920s excavation.
Yeah.
It might be a more complex structure, which might not just be a trackway.
You're being cagey. I don't understand what else it could be.
Well, we do know of other prehistoric sites that had lots of piles and lots of wood associated with them, but weren't necessarily just trackways like Flag Fen.
Yeah.
And what was that?
Well, ritual is always the explanation.
Back on that again.
I wonder. I thought Richard was being a bit shifty.
Yeah, well, there it looked as if there was an awful lot of metal objects in a sort of shallow sort of pool, lake or whatever. And it was like as if they'd gone out to this platform and thrown this stuff off the end. There was so much of it, which you might do if you were interested in water deities or something like that. You were making offerings of material to them. Now, we've never had anything like that in this area, but it's a very watery environment, so there's no reason why we shouldn't.
8, 3, 7.
Has Robert managed to get a dendro date from the wood samples he took yesterday?
We are all waiting here, absolutely agog.
The structure date, I think you're looking at a date of around about, let's say, 900 BC.
Felling date of 900 BC.
Yeah, which is Bronze Age.
which is Bronze Age, late Bronze Age.
You ready?
Yeah.
Right, let's go.
Okay, it's coming up. Careful with your head. Okay. Richard.
Got it.
Okay. Are we...
Leave it like this.
Oh, like
That's
that.
it. That's it. Right. And down.
Well, as far as we were concerned, that was a real turn-up for the books. But what does it look like to you, Francis?
Yeah, it looks a bit like Flag Fen. It sort of has a feel of trackway to it, but I suspect it's going to be a lot more complicated than that.
Before we go any further, it'll probably be a good idea to have a closer look at Flag Fen, which is exactly what I set out to do. This is Flag Fen, just on the edge of Peterborough. As in Somerset, this area was once entirely underwater. Now a lot of it has dried out. Archaeologists have been digging here for the last 15 years. So this place might help to give us a better understanding of what we came across on the Somerset levels. It's a popular place for teaching about prehistoric life. So I joined a class of 10-year-olds to learn some more.
Because the people that lived here 3,000 years ago lived in small, round houses, in round huts. And they decided to build a massive monument across the bay. And we've painted it on the floor here. From the power station, right the way across where you're sitting, to the other side of what was then the coast. But they didn't put one line of oak posts in, 5 rows of these posts right across this bay, and it's 1 kilometre wide. As if that wasn't enough, when they got about 2/3 of the way over, they started to build a great big platform. Now this platform is about the size of Wembley Stadium.
Although they've been digging here for so long, they've still only uncovered 5% of the site, and that is carefully preserved inside this large building. The wood has survived thanks to the peat keeping it wet. The lack of oxygen helps to preserve all sorts of things. So now that it is exposed, the archaeologists have to keep it damp, otherwise it would rot within hours. A couple of times an hour, a sprinkler system kicks in.
It won't continue rotting.
The modern planks are there for the archaeologists to work from. This excavated area is actually part of the platform that had been built about 2/3 of the way across. Apart from the wood, the archaeologists also managed to find a large quantity of metal objects, which had all been placed along one side of the platform. These objects suggest that the trackway was something more than a simple road.
And we actually think it's a great big, if you like, a great big church in their terms. So we think it's a centre of ritual. We know they didn't live here, they lived on the fen edge, on the good ground.
So here they've done a reduced-scale reconstruction of what the site would have looked like, with the 5 rows of timber posts marching out to the great platform. Of course, there would have been planks also for the people to walk on so that they could reach the platform, and the whole thing must have been 10 times the size. And 3,000 years ago, it would have looked incredibly impressive. She comes wholly into its own, because a historian like me is totally at sea.
No writing.
No historical records, nothing to go on. So what does this structure that you found at Flag Fen, what does it tell us about the people of that time?
I think the first thing it tells us is that they were remarkably well off financially. We didn't have money. We've got to wait 1,000 years for that. But they were very prosperous, and they were able to construct this extraordinary, huge site across the water, and then they would place daggers, swords, spearheads, some of them from Central Europe, in the water as offerings. In prehistory, religion reached into all aspects of life. So the trackways that you're finding in the Somerset levels, they were never just plain roads like the A1. And so at Flag Fen, it probably started life as an ordinary road. And then during its 400 years of existence, from 1300 BC to about 900, And don't forget, that's as long as between us and Shakespeare.
Sure.
That's a long time. During that time, it became more formal and probably more religious.
Is it going too far then to say this was a ceremonial procession way? Almost?
Yes, I think it was the water which was the special world. That was where you got away from the world of the living, and that's where you came into contact with the world of the ancestors. I mean, people were commemorated in the waters of Flag Fen, but I don't think they were actually buried. It was from Flag Fen that they began their journey to the next world, the world of the dead.
The world of ritual, basically.
I hate the word, yes, the world of religion.
For in my experience, you see, on Time Team shoots, the explanation of ritual is always the easy out for the archaeologists. But I suppose you found that this has to be the conclusion in this instance.
It's the only possible explanation. I personally think that they didn't have the sharp distinction that we have between religion and ordinary life. I suspect myself it was probably not allowed to be travelled, for example, by children. I suspect it was I think it was a very important, a very select road, and only very, very carefully chosen people would have been allowed along it. And I think the moment that a person stopped being a figure within society, a chief or whatever, and became a private individual was the moment that that person went down the road, at least that person's remains went down the road. And you had a fantastic example of that recently with Princess Diana's funeral. If you remember the public ceremony in the Abbey and then the drive through North London along the M1, and then she turns off the road into the gates at Althorpe, and the gates shut, and a policeman stands in the middle of the road, and then at that point the princess had become a Northamptonshire girl. The public person had given way to the private person, and that is what I think was happening as people set out along their journey at Flag Fen.
This is the timelessness of history and, of course, of archaeology.
Absolutely.
And in a couple of minutes' time, we'll be taking a closer look at some of the intriguing items that have been found that tell us more about the people of the Bronze Age. And here I've got to get slightly kitted up to insulate this wonderful item from my sweaty palms. Things like this incredible sword made some 3,000 years ago. And we'll also look at how these timber structures came to be built in the first place. Join us again in part 2. Welcome back. A few moments ago I left you with this beautiful sword, and the man that found it, Francis Pryor, is with me today. Francis, tell us a bit about this weapon.
Well, it's a slashing sword. It's got all the weight down at that end. Probably designed originally to be used from horseback, so cutting downwards, but very few have been found in battles. The vast majority are found in graves or placed in water. They're symbols of power. You know,
status symbols.
Status symbols. What was happening at Flag Fen is that swords like this, and we found quite a few of them, were very, very carefully placed in the water. Maybe when somebody was thought to be making their journey to the next world.
Is this connected in any way with the fact that this sword, like many of the items that you've found, have been deliberately damaged in some way?
Yes. I mean, the damage is taking the sword out of this world. It's taking it out of circulation. We find that with many of the artifacts we've got, pins and brooches, they've all been twisted and smashed around. Axes have had their handles broken and so on. It's taking them out of this world.
And haven't I heard something about little leather bags?
Yes,
this astounded me. I'd never heard of this before.
I think it's unique. There's a little cemetery about sort of half a mile from Flag Fen where there's over 100 cremated bodies. They actually found the area where they cooked them, you know, the crematorium. Sorry, crematorium. And the bones were placed in little leather bags, in little scoops in the ground. And then you see, I suspect they'd have kept 1 or 2 bones back, and they'd have gone out to Flag Fen and been offered to the waters. You see, I don't think it was simple.
In Time Team last Sunday, the team found a fascinating selection of wood and a few bones at Greylake on the Somerset levels. Remarkably, there are some similarities in all of this with the material found by Francis over the years at Flag Fen.
Thanks to Francis and to my good friend Richard Brunning, who's driven hell for leather from Somerset, we can look at some of the finds from Greylake and indeed from Flag Fen. And this is the bit of wood that I remember coming out of the peat at Greylake, Francis.
Yes, so it's a piece of oak. It's been split across the grain. It could have been from Flag Fen. I mean, it's absolutely identical to some of the timbers from Flag Fen.
I found it fascinating that it was shaped in exactly the same way.
That's it, long pencil-like tip.
Yeah. As the people who were reconstructing the trackway found was the only way to get the blooming wood into the peat.
That's right, it saved a lot of work if they got it out first.
Yes. And these, we saw one of the swords earlier. This is one that was broken in the...
Yeah, this is one which is broken as a result of a failure in the casting. It is,
I see.
So it's not a well-made one. And you can see on the edge, it's very sort of bashed. Well, it's been bashed. It's been bashed up against a sharp rock or something like that as part of this process of killing the thing.
Yeah. And this is the high spot for me, and you've kindly said that I can pick them up. But these are Bronze Age shears, complete with their carrying case. And I think, I mean, these haven't been damaged for whatever reason. They're absolutely breathtakingly beautiful.
They are. Yeah, and I think the shears were for cutting hair. They weren't for
sheep.
For sheep.
No.
No. And you can see where the whetstone fitted in the bottom of the case, and a little bit for your finger just to pop it out.
It's incredible.
And over here, a razor.
So they were shaving?
They were shaving. Oh, they didn't all look like archaeologists.
When you're in the presence of these things, I think you realise the magic of, well, either history when you're dealing with a document or archaeology when you're dealing with things like this. So I suppose with all these lovely things laid out, this is a kind of archaeologist's altar.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I'm in archaeology. I mean, these things speak to me. They're voices from the past.
Of course, I suppose we forget that the people of those times were quite extremely talented and quite sophisticated.
Well, I mean, you've only got to look at the way they built their houses. It's extraordinary. I mean, for example, we know from looking at the tree rings that when they ordered timber from forests maybe 5 or 10 miles away, but some of the oak has to have come a long way, that they could actually specify how many posts were going to be needed, how many planks were going to be needed, because we've actually found planks and posts that come from the same tree. And in one case, a post and a plank are 1 kilometre apart. I mean, it was every reason to think they were as organised and as methodical as we are today.
And of course, that came home to us very sharply last Sunday when Time Team tried to reconstruct one of these trackways. And it wasn't as simple as we thought at first.
Well, this is a noble tree,
Well,
isn't
it certainly is a bit of a beast, isn't it? It's an oak, 200 years old. Yeah, 4 inches. These need sharpening.
Anywhere near as sharp as this. What we're going to try to do is to split this oak into planks using nothing more than a mallet and a series of wooden wedges.
This is a traditional way of splitting timber like this oak, which has been used from the Neolithic through to the present time, really, now.
Oh, look.
You can see it probably going along there, but certainly at the end here, we're opening right the way out.
Yeah.
You want to cut through here?
Yeah.
Hang on, done this. That's got it. Hey.
There you go.
Positively musical, isn't it, eh?
The light's fading fast, and we still have to cut points onto these timbers ready for tomorrow.
I think if we go for that, really.
Well,
Victor's drawing, based on the evidence found in 1926, is the blueprint for this experiment, which is clearly going to be a question of trial and error.
We've got to get it the right way round too. To get the mortise round the outside.
Okay.
All right.
1, 2, 3. Cool. Can we? Oh, that ain't gonna go.
No, that ain't down, is it?
This wasn't working, so the team took a different approach, splitting the planks just like the ones we had found.
the conditions our track builders are working in today are in fact very similar to those faced by woodworkers in the Somerset levels thousands of years ago.
Without the aid of a safety net. The stilt walker.
That's doing well.
It's going in, isn't it?
God, how do I get
As if we do.
And just jump up and down?
Just jump up and down.
No, in my way, it's not going to make any difference.
It's going.
It is going.
Is it?
Yes, it is. Well, it might look crude.
I'd be more impressed if the water hadn't gone down the insides of my waders.
Well, it's keeping my feet dry. I reckon that's a good job. Well done, that is. It works.
Well, what do you think then, gentlemen?
I think it's brilliant.
All right.
I think we can be rightly proud of ourselves over this.
Well, I think we've achieved what we set out to do.
Well, it probably don't look much, but it's functional.
Having gone through that process, you can see how incredibly complicated it turned out to be. But I wonder, when these great works were fashioned, who did it? Was it a public activity, a private activity? Were there little groups of specialists, craftsmen?
It strikes me that the technicians, the technocrats who actually fashioned Flag Fen were probably ordinary men and women. And in the past, a farmer was able to turn his or her hands to almost anything he chose. And one of the skills they had was extraordinary ability to work wood. They could use an axe, superbly. I think they had their gatherings when this sort of thing was done in the dry months of a year.
Yeah.
In the autumn, maybe September through to November. And that's when the communal work was done.
What I find fascinating is this idea of communal labour over limited periods of the year.
The thing is, don't forget, farmers have to meet regularly because they have to move animals around. Yeah. If you don't move animals around, you get inbreeding and you have problems. So I reckon they must have been meeting every year, maybe even twice a year, at Flag Fen or wherever.
So, Francis, do we know anything about the kind of clothes these Bronze Age people would have worn?
Yes, they had woven clothes made out of wool, sheep's wool, and Bronze Age sheep were wonderful. They weren't white. You could have any colour you want as long as it was brown.
I'm Ford cars, yes.
Yes, right. Now, some clothes have been found in Denmark, just a tiny bit later than our period, but only not long. Older women wore, as would suit them, something looked rather like a dress. It was like a sort of tunic with a cloak. Men didn't wear trousers. They wore a tunic and a cloak and a little furry hat, little woven hat. So your underclothes would have been made out of wool too. But I shouldn't think they probably got washed very often.
I think I'd rather not go back in time under those circumstances. And of course you didn't mention any hint of a bow tie, but I suppose they didn't have a great deal of use for them. Well, thank you very much for being with me this week. Remember, on Sunday it's Time Team again, and I'll be back with Time.Team.Extra next week. Cheerio for now.
Channel 4 is producing a 68-page booklet of all the site reports and information on how to get involved in archaeology. To obtain a copy, send a check.